To the naked eye, Naomi Judd was the absolute embodiment of the American dream, a red-headed icon dazzling the masses alongside her daughter, Wynonna. Yet beneath the rhinestones and the applause, a tempest of agonizing pain and childhood trauma was brewing unseen by the public. It wasn't until an emotional interview in 2026 that Larry Strickland finally peeled back the curtain, his voice cracking as he recounted a terrifying evening that almost brought their entire world crashing down in a split second. For more than 30 years, the public revered Naomi as a pillar of resilience, the matriarch of the Judds, who transformed her hardships into chart-topping gold. However, hidden behind the shimmering Grammy trophies and the roar of sold-out arenas lay a volatile secret, one so disturbing that Larry's confession left even the most die-hard fans reeling in shock. What actually transpired on that fateful night when a single phone call seemingly triggered a total collapse of their sanctuary? Why was this explosive truth suppressed for decades, only surfacing after the devastating loss of the country legend? Larry Strickland can still vividly recall the night his life nearly ended in the late 1980s, a memory seared into his brain forever. He had just wrapped up a grueling tour with his gospel quartet, spending weeks ministering in churches and auditoriums throughout the Deep South. The exhausting run had kept him on the road for nearly a month, crisscrossing through the heat of Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. Bone-tired and road-weary, all he could think about was the comfort of his own bed and reuniting with his wife after such a long separation. But the moment he stepped across the threshold of their Nashville estate, a chilling sensation washed over him. Something was terribly off. The house was engulfed in an ominous silence, devoid of the usual music or the bustling energy of Naomi welcoming him home. That's when the scene of destruction hit him. Shreds of their most cherished memories, specifically their wedding photos, littered the floor like confetti. Glass crunched under his boots as he surveyed the damage. Frames were smashed, desecrating the images of their holy union at Christ Church. Snapshots from their honeymoon moments of pure joy and intimacy had been violently torn apart in a fit of rage. Walking outside, he found his wardrobe, meticulously packed luggage and loose garments strewn across the manicured front lawn like common trash. His entire personal inventory was exposed to the elements, with expensive suits and jackets already soaking up the heavy Tennessee dampness. Panic began to set in his pulse, hammering in his ears as he moved deeper into the residence, shouting Naomi's name into the void with no reply. Upon entering the master suite, the sight that greeted him was heartbreaking. There she stood, her face ravaged by a torrent of tears, eyes puffy and wild. But his concern instantly turned to ice-cold fear when he lowered his gaze to her hands, which were gripping a loaded firearm, a pistol they kept for home defence. The barrel was levelled straight at his chest, causing Larry to freeze instantly as the moisture evaporated from his mouth. He was no stranger to Naomi's intense mood swings or her battles with mental health, but the energy radiating from her now was unrecognisable. This wasn't just sadness, it was a lethal cocktail of paranoia, betrayal and absolute despair, reflecting in eyes that looked right through him. Desperate to de-escalate, he opened his mouth to reason with her, to take a tentative step forward and bridge the gap. But before a single syllable could escape his lips, before his brain could even register the danger, Naomi squeezed the trigger. The explosion was thunderous, a concussive blast that bounced off the bedroom walls, leaving Larry in a state of sensory overload. In that fraction of a second, time distorted, and Larry's body locked up, bracing for the impact of the bullet. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird as he frantically checked his torso for blood or a burning sensation. As the smoke cleared and his senses slowly returned, the realization washed over him by some miracle the shot had gone wide. He was unharmed, though he would spend the rest of his life wondering if she missed on purpose or if her trembling hands had saved him. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, the two of them locked in a tableau of horror, Naomi still clutching the smoking gun. Larry remained rooted to the spot, his mind unable to compute the reality that his wife had just fired at him. Eventually, survival instinct took over, and without uttering a word, he turned his back on the woman he loved and walked out of the room. Scrambling to salvage whatever clothes hadn't been ruined on the lawn, he threw them into his vehicle and sped away into the night. For nearly 40 years, this harrowing incident was buried deep, a skeleton in the closet that only the two of them knew existed. No police were called, no reports filed. He kept the dark secret from everyone, shielding Wynonna and Ashley from the knowledge that their mother had nearly killed their stepfather. Larry retreated into isolation for several weeks, wrestling with the trauma and debating if there was any way to salvage a marriage that had turned so violent. In time, Naomi began the campaign to win him back, flooding his phone with messages and sending heartfelt letters pleading for forgiveness. She poured out apologies, swearing up and down that the darkness had passed and such a terrifying episode would never repeat itself. After a long period of soul-searching, Larry chose love over safety, deciding to return to the home that had almost been his tomb. They finally sat down to confront the demons that led to that moment, forging a solemn pact to protect their private life from public scrutiny. They agreed to bury the memory of the gunshot, vowing to take the secret to the grave rather than let it tarnish their legacy. They locked the trauma away in a mental vault, putting on a brave face to preserve their family, their careers, and the carefully crafted image of country music royalty. Way back in 1995, exactly 5 years after the notorious incident took place, NBC premiered a television movie titled Naomi and Wynonna Love Can Build a Bridge. This film peeled back the curtain on the Judds' meteoric rise to country music superstardom, detailing their gritty struggles and complex family dynamics. There was one particularly shocking scene where the actress portraying Naomi actually fires a handgun during a heated altercation with her husband. At the time, audiences viewed that moment as pure Hollywood theatrics, a dramatised beat designed specifically to ramp up the tension for TV viewers. While critics lauded the movie for its emotional weight, nobody realised that the gun incident was rooted in cold, hard fact, as Naomi and Larry neither confirmed nor denied its authenticity. They simply pressed forward, riding the wave of the Judds' peak popularity, juggling glitzy award shows, sold-out arena tours and endless media spots. To the outside world, their lives looked like a fairy tale of massive success and unwavering public adoration. Consequently, nobody bothered to ask if that terrifying scene held any water. Fans just wrote it off as standard scriptwriter exaggeration. Critics dismissed it as creative license, and for decades, Naomi and Larry were perfectly content to let that narrative stand. However, in 2026, 4 years after Naomi's heartbreaking passing, Larry finally shattered the silence in the Lifetime documentary, The Judd Family, Truth Be Told. In a moment of raw vulnerability, he sat down for an on-camera interview and confessed the chilling reality of what went down that night. With the cameras rolling, he chose his words with agonising precision, his voice dropping to a whisper heavy with decades of regret as he admitted, "It really happened." That was the bombshell admission. It happened, but the question that immediately burned in everyone's mind was simple. Why? What kind of torment pushes a woman to aim a loaded weapon at her husband and actually pull the trigger? What level of despair leads to such a violent act? The answer unveiled a betrayal far deeper than the public ever suspected, a breach of trust that completely broke her spirit. Exactly 24 hours before Naomi fired that shot, she received a phone call that effectively detonated her entire universe. Larry was out on tour at the time, leaving Naomi home alone when the phone rang and a strange woman's voice drifted through the line. It was a complete stranger, someone Naomi had never laid eyes on, boldly claiming she was in love with Larry. She didn't just make claims, she shared intimate personal details that only a lover would know, calling him her soulmate in a conversation that felt like an eternity to Naomi. When the line finally went dead, Naomi didn't scream or break down in tears. Instead, she descended into a terrifying stone-cold silence for a full day. She sat there stewing in the agony, her mind replaying graphic images of her husband with another woman over and over again. That grief quickly curdled into something much darker, and Larry later confirmed in the documentary that he had indeed been unfaithful. The stranger on the phone hadn't been lying. He had cheated on his wife, and the veil of their perfect marriage was lifted. For a woman like Naomi, who had spent her entire existence terrified of being abandoned, this betrayal was nothing short of catastrophic. Remember, she had grown up dirt poor in Ashland, Kentucky, traumatised by watching her own mother struggle with severe mental illness. She had clawed her way up as a single mother working grueling night shifts as a nurse after her first marriage collapsed, building emotional walls to survive. The one man she finally allowed herself to trust had just taken a sledgehammer to those walls, and when Larry returned, he walked straight into the wreckage. Naomi had already destroyed everything in the house that symbolised their union, and she stood there with the gun hands, trembling eyes, burning with rage and heartbreak. Looking back, Larry stated he truly believed she wasn't trying to end his life in that moment. It was a primal scream for help, the only way she could express that she was drowning in pain, and while the bullet missed him, the emotional damage was permanent. Larry moved out for several weeks, and although they eventually reconciled and remained married for another 33 years, things changed. Their marriage never fully recovered its innocence. The trust was shattered, and some wounds are simply too deep to ever heal completely. It became a partnership built on fame and fractures, and to really grasp the gravity of that night, you have to rewind to the very start of their story. Naomi Judd first crossed paths with Larry Strickland back in 1979 at a local music event in Nashville, Tennessee. Back then, Naomi was far from the polished country music icon the world would later come to worship. She was just a 33-year-old single mom grinding away as a registered nurse in the ICU at Williamson Medical Center. Her daily life was a grueling marathon of exhaustion, hardship, and a constant fight just to keep her head above water. She was raising two daughters, Wynonna, who was 14 at the time, and Ashley, who was just 11. Following her messy divorce from Michael Simonella, Naomi was on her own, working impossible hours just to keep a roof over their heads. There were plenty of dark times when Naomi had to decide between paying the electric bill or putting food on the dinner table. She took the graveyard shifts because they paid a little extra, even though it killed her to be away from her girls when they needed her guidance the most. Wynonna was forced to step up and play mom to Ashley, making sure her little sister did her homework and got to school safely. It was a childhood defined by instability, uncertainty, and constantly packing up boxes. The family bounced around frequently, living in various small towns across Kentucky and Tennessee, never staying long enough to put down roots. Naomi was always hunting for better pay, but through all the poverty and struggle, she never let go of her burning dream to make music. She was constantly singing around the house, scribbling lyrics in her downtime, and holding on to this massive dream of one day making it big in the cutthroat music business. That relentless ambition eventually dragged her out to a hole-in-the-wall showcase in Nashville, a spot where starving artists gathered to schmooze. And right there in that unassuming little joint, she crossed paths with Larry Strickland. Now you have to understand, Larry came from a completely different universe compared to her wild world. He was a good old boy, born and bred in North Carolina, deeply rooted in the church scene, having immersed himself in gospel music before he was even old enough to drive. By the time he met Naomi, he wasn't just some nobody. He was a heavy hitter in the gospel circuit, singing bass for J.D. Sumner and the Stamps Quartet, legendary kings of the Southern gospel scene. Larry's gig had taken him to heights that most wannabe stars in Music City would kill for. Get this, he actually spent the 1970s touring with the king himself, Elvis Presley, dropping those low bass notes during Elvis's legendary Las Vegas residencies and sold-out stadium tours across the United States. The guy had graced the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, cut legitimate records, and earned serious street cred among the gospel elite. When Naomi and Larry finally locked eyes, the chemistry was electric, like two magnets snapping together instantly. Naomi was a force of nature. She was loud, she was driven, and she had an intensity that could fill a room. She had that survivor's glint in her eyes, a fire forged from years of scraping by and refusing to let her dreams die on the vine. Larry was the total opposite, cool, calm, and collected. He wasn't the type to run his mouth. He was the strong, silent type who preferred to let his moves do the talking for him. He brought a zen-like stability that perfectly counterbalanced Naomi's chaotic, high-octane energy. They kicked off a romance that burned slowly, stretching out over a decade of dating. But while their love story was taking its time, Naomi's life was flipping upside down. She and her daughter Wynonna teamed up as the Judds, grinding it out at tiny local dives and dusty county fairs just to get heard. But you couldn't ignore those harmonies, they were spine-tingling. Their stage chemistry was magnetic, and soon enough the whole town was buzzing about this mother-daughter powerhouse. Fast forward to 1983, and boom, they snagged a massive deal with RCA Records. Their debut track, Had a Dream for the Heart, dropped and made a little splash. But that was just the appetizer. It was the next few records that really blew the doors off the industry and launched them into the stratosphere of superstardom. We're talking smash hits like Mama, He's Crazy Why Not Me, and the tearjerker Grandpa. Tell me about the good old days songs that didn't just top the charts. They owned them and raked in Grammy Awards left and right. The Judds became the defining act of country music throughout the entire 1980s, absolutely dominating the airwaves. They were moving millions of units and playing to screaming sold-out arenas from coast to coast across the United States. Naomi's transformation was insane. She went from pulling grueling night shifts as a nurse just to keep the lights on to rocking designer gowns and accepting trophies on the biggest stages in the world. Then, on May 6th, 1989, after 10 long years of courtship, Naomi and Larry finally tied the knot at Christchurch in Nashville. It was a fairy tale wedding, absolutely dripping with glamour, packed with family friends and a who's who of country music royalty. By the time she said, "I do," Naomi was sitting on the top of the world, ruling the charts with an iron fist. The Judds were on a non-stop tour grind, churning out #1 hits and cementing a legacy that would make them immortal in Nashville history. But let's be real, that level of fame comes with a nasty price tag. Naomi was getting crushed under the weight of demands from record execs, PR teams, and a media machine that wouldn't quit. Her life became a fishbowl where every single step was watched and every word she spoke was picked apart by the tabloids. Critics dissected every performance and the touring schedule was brutal. Sleeping on buses, living out of suitcases and hitting a new city every night with zero downtime to breathe. The endless travel, the complete loss of privacy and the suffocating pressure to look perfect 24/7 started to crack the facade. It was a recipe for disaster and it began destroying Naomi's physical and mental well-being piece by piece. Then in 1990, barely a year into her marriage, the other shoe dropped. Naomi got hit with news that would shatter her world. She was diagnosed with hepatitis C, a silent killer attacking her liver, likely something she picked up years ago from a needle stick while working in the ICU back when she was just trying to save lives. The diagnosis hit her like a freight train. The doctors didn't sugarcoat it. They told her this could kill her, and even with the best treatment money could buy, survival was a roll of the dice. This terrifying reality forced Naomi into a corner where she had to make the hardest call of her life. Right at the absolute peak of the Judds' domination, while they were selling out stadiums, she had to walk away and announce her retirement from the stage. They launched the farewell tour, and let me tell you, it was an emotional roller coaster. Fans crammed into venues just to catch one last glimpse of the magic. Naomi and Wynonna poured their souls out on stage every single night, haunted by the knowledge that any show could be the last time they ever sang together. It all culminated in December 1991 with a massive pay-per-view concert that went down in history as one of the most watched musical events of the decade. Once the lights went down and the music stopped, Naomi had to face a new battle fighting for her life. She dove into brutal treatments for hepatitis C, subjecting herself to experimental drugs that left her frail, exhausted and barely hanging on. The side effects were agonising. The pain was relentless and the terrifying thought that she might not make it hung over her head every single day. Larry was her rock through the nightmare, staying by her side, but let's be honest, the trauma of her illness put a massive suffocating strain on their marriage. And to make things even more complicated, Larry kept on touring with his gospel group because music wasn't just a hobby for him. It was his lifeblood and his paycheck. Larry didn't have the luxury of just quitting his job, especially not with the medical bills stacking up like skyscrapers while Naomi was sidelined and unable to bring in a paycheck. But every hour he spent clocking in meant an hour Naomi spent by herself, trapped in that big house with nothing but her sickness, her terrifying thoughts, and a loneliness that kept getting bigger. She felt completely deserted, and even though her brain knew Larry was out there keeping the lights on, her heart still felt left behind. Against all odds, the treatments actually started kicking in, and Naomi fought her way back from the brink of hepatitis C, eventually beating the virus in what felt like a miracle. With her health finally returning, she didn't just sit around, she poured all that renewed energy into fresh ventures and ambitious projects. She hit the talk show circuit, hard-penned multiple bestsellers detailing her survival story, and transformed herself into a loud, proud advocate for anyone battling Hep C or mental health struggles. She didn't hide the ugly parts by ripping open her own wounds for the world to see. She became a beacon of hope for millions of folks fighting the same dark battles. But let's be real, once the cameras stopped rolling, things at home were a mess. Just because she stepped off the stage didn't mean the crushing weight of superstardom magically vanished. Honestly, the pressure cooker just got hotter because she wasn't just a singer anymore. She was juggling a dozen different high-stakes careers at once. She was an author, a TV star, a crusader, and a speaker, all while trying to keep her marriage afloat and stay connected to her two superstar daughters who were busy chasing their own dreams. You had Wynonna, who didn't miss a beat, continuing to perform solo and absolutely crushing it in the industry. After the Judds hung up the microphones, Y was out there racking up #1 hits and selling out arenas from coast to coast. Then there was Ashley, who took a different path and conquered Hollywood, becoming a massive movie star in her own right. With both girls running their own empires, Naomi started feeling like she was slipping out of their orbit, and the usual drama of trying to blend a family just added fuel to the fire. Even Larry had his own thing going on, his own gigs, his own circle of buddies, and a whole life that didn't revolve around Naomi's celebrity bubble. Behind closed doors, they were butting heads over finances, arguing about what mattered most, and fighting about how to manage the relentless intrusion of the press. And buried under all that superficial fighting was a bedrock of deep emotional trauma that neither of them really had the tools to fix. It was right in the middle of this perfect storm of stress, isolation, and unresolved tension that Larry stepped out on her. That affair wasn't just a mistake. It was the nuclear option that blew the lid off every single crack in their marriage foundation, making the problems impossible to ignore. That betrayal set the stage for a nightmare that would chase them forever, foreshadowing a mental health crisis that nobody saw coming, even after they managed to patch things up. Naomi's psychological state didn't just dip, it completely cratered in the most terrifying way imaginable. By the early 2000s, doctors had handed her a laundry list of heavy diagnoses, including major depression, crippling anxiety, PTSD, and severe sleep disorders. Any one of those would be enough to break a person. But Naomi was fighting all of them at once, and the depression wrapped her in a blanket of constant suffocating despair. The anxiety kept her nerves fried, leaving her in a perpetual state of terror and panic that never let up. The PTSD forced her to relive her worst memories on a loop, while the sleep disorders ensured she could never ever shut her brain off to find peace. It got so bad that she had to check into psychiatric facilities just to get 24/7 monitoring and care because it wasn't safe for her to be alone. When the pills stopped working, she turned to electroconvulsive therapy shock treatments designed to reboot the brain when depression becomes life-threatening. Even with all that intervention, the stretch between 2011 and 2013 was a living hell, with Larry describing how she became totally disoriented and cut off from reality. She was looking at people she'd known for years and drawing a blank, eventually building a wall around herself and locking out everyone, even her own blood. Larry stood on the sidelines, completely powerless, watching the woman he loved fade away, while he couldn't do a thing to stop it. If you look at the clips from those last few years, it's gut-wrenching. The lights were on, but nobody was home and her eyes were just empty. She was frail, wasting away physically and emotionally. She had already checked out, living in a completely different universe than the rest of us. Larry later confessed that for 13 long years, he was basically her shadow, acting as the one pushing pills, begging her to eat and trying to get her moving. But with the benefit of hindsight, he admits he wishes he'd handled things with a softer touch during those dark days. He said that if he truly understood the darkness she was in, he would have offered more compassion instead of frustration. But the truth is, the caretaker burnout was eating him alive too. The tragic reality is that Larry just didn't grasp the severity of it. He admitted later that it never even crossed his mind that she was this close to the edge. He thought a little tough love and activity would snap her out of it. But Naomi wasn't dealing with simple fatigue. She was planning her exit strategy, which brings us to those final mysterious days and the bombshell will she left behind. In April of 2022, Naomi suddenly hopped on a plane to Vienna, Austria, without telling a soul why she was going. Larry stayed stateside, and to this day, nobody is quite sure why he didn't join her on that trip. Maybe she was seeking treatment, or maybe she just needed to run away, but when she touched back down in Nashville, everyone could see a dark shift in her demeanour. She looked drained and completely detached, unable to find a single ounce of joy, even though the Country Music Hall of Fame induction was just days away. Then, on April 30th, 2022, exactly one day before she was supposed to accept her award, the unthinkable happened. Naomi took her own life with a firearm inside her Tennessee estate, and it was Ashley who had the horrific misfortune of finding her mother. The timing was absolutely shattering. Naomi was gone just mere hours before the music world was set to crown her a legend. Even amidst the crushing weight of their grief, the family managed to pull it together and carry on with the memorial service. Wynonna stood up fighting through tears to give a gut-wrenching speech about their rollercoaster dynamic and undying love, while Larry remained stoic, honouring his late wife with a dignified silence. However, the real bombshell dropped shortly after Naomi's passing. The reading of her last will and testament, which she had finalised back in November of 2017, revealed that she had signed over her entire $25 million fortune exclusively to Larry. In a move that shocked everyone, neither Wynonna nor Ashley was explicitly named in the document. The omission set the rumour mill on fire, with insiders claiming Wynonna was absolutely devastated, feeling disregarded despite playing a massive role in building the Judd legacy. Legal analysts and estate planners were quick to point out that leaving assets to a surviving spouse is standard practice for long marriages to maximise tax benefits, but the public wasn't buying the dry explanation. To the fans and the family, it felt like a final, complicated, emotional statement from the grave. To make matters worse, personal artefacts discovered after Naomi was gone started to paint a troubled picture. Leaked voicemails exchanged between the matriarch and her daughters exposed raw nerves, deep-seated frustrations, and painful crossed wires. Her private journals and a stash of letters she never mailed offered a heartbreaking glimpse into just how torn Naomi felt inside. The pages were filled with declarations of intense love, but they were tangled up with confusion, heavy guilt, and a desperate, agonising wish to fix the broken bridges in her family. Ashley had already gone on record in her memoir about feeling like an afterthought, abandoned not just by her mother's touring schedule, but emotionally left behind as well. Meanwhile, Wynonna shared a bond with her mom through the music, yet still battled unresolved trauma. When you combine the will, the audio recordings, and the diaries, it showed a woman who loved fiercely, but was ultimately drowning in her own mental anguish. Then came Larry's turn to speak, and the truths he spilled changed everything we thought we knew. After spending 2 long years grieving out of the spotlight, Larry Strickland finally decided it was time to step up and tell his side of the story. He chose to bare his soul in a major way during the 2026 Lifetime special, The Judd Family Truth, Be Told, which hit the airwaves 3 years after the tragedy. Larry sat down for the taping knowing full well he was about to rip open old wounds in what would be the most grueling interview of his life. When the cameras rolled, he looked noticeably weathered, the lines of stress and sorrow etched deep into his face, yet there was a steeliness in his eyes. He was ready to set the record straight about his life with Naomi. It was during this candid conversation that Larry finally verified a long-standing rumour that had haunted the family legend, the shooting incident. He confirmed that the violent confrontation had actually taken place inside their home many decades ago. For the longest time, fans had debated whether the terrifying scene depicted in the 1995 biopic Love Can Build a Bridge was just Hollywood drama or a real memory. Both Larry and Naomi had kept their lips sealed on the matter while she was alive. But now, with Naomi at peace and beyond the reach of public judgment, Larry felt he owed the world the truth. It really happened. He admitted, his voice remaining steady even as the emotional weight of the memory hung heavy in the air. That is really all I can say about it. It happened, he reiterated, confirming the darkness of that night. He spared the audience the graphic specifics, the deafening bang, the sheer terror or the chaos that followed. but he made it undeniably clear that Naomi had indeed discharged a firearm during a heated moment in their marriage. However, Larry didn't bring this up to cast himself as a helpless victim or to garner sympathy points. Nor was he trying to tarnish Naomi's legacy. Instead, he discussed the terrifying event with a shocking amount of grace and empathy. He clarified that he never saw the shooting as an act of pure hate, but rather as a violent symptom of the deep psychological scars that Naomi carried. "It wasn't about being mad at me," he explained softly, trying to contextualize her actions. He viewed it as her internal demons lashing out her agony, her paralyzing fear of being left alone. She was screaming for someone to save her, and that was the only way she knew how to express it in that moment. In a twist of brutal honesty, Larry also shone the spotlight on his own failures that paved the way for that crisis. He openly confessed to stepping out on the marriage, admitting that his infidelity was the match that lit the fuse, triggering her breakdown and the subsequent violence. He refused to make excuses for his straying or downplay the devastation his actions caused their family. He fully owned the pain he inflicted. It was a level of raw accountability and self-reflection that you almost never see from celebrities protecting their image. Larry could have easily taken those dark secrets to the grave to keep his reputation pristine. He could have dodged the public scrutiny that always follows an admission of cheating and marital dysfunction. Instead, he chose the hard road of transparency, hoping that airing their dirty laundry might offer a lifeline to others drowning in similar toxic situations. Larry also went into heartbreaking detail about the heavy regrets he carries regarding how he managed Naomi's mental health battles in the twilight of her life. He painted a picture of those final months as a blur of chaos, stress, and frantic energy. He noticed that her spark was dimming rapidly, and it felt like she was physically and mentally fading away right in front of him. Desperate to fix her, he pushed hard for structure, badgering her to eat healthy food, forcing her to exercise, and being strict about her medication schedule. At that time, he genuinely believed he was acting as a responsible caregiver. He thought that if he could just keep her in a rigid routine and focus on her physical health, her mind would follow suit and heal. But looking back through the lens of grief, Larry realised his strategy was completely wrong for what she needed. "If I had known just how deep in the hole she was emotionally," he said, his voice cracking under the strain, "I would have been so much softer. I would have traded the discipline for gentleness. Instead of nagging her to walk or eat, I should have just held her close. I should have told her I loved her 1,000 times more. I should have just sat there in the darkness with her instead of trying to be the mechanic fixing a broken engine." You could practically feel the heaviness in his tone, a thick layer of remorse that you simply cannot fake. That level of raw self-awareness and his willingness to dissect his own missteps painted a picture of a man who has spent every day since Naomi's passing agonising over their relationship and the things he might have handled differently. During a heartbreakingly honest sit-down with People magazine, Larry peeled back the curtain on the devastating personal toll he paid while watching the love of his life fade away. He dropped a bombshell confession about their life behind closed doors, admitting for over 13 years, "I was her shadow. I was there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, never leaving her side." He continued, "I wouldn't even step out of the room without giving her a full itinerary of where I was headed and exactly when I would walk back through that door. I was the one watching every pill she took, making sure she actually ate. My whole existence was keeping her alive." When you love someone battling those demons, you don't just watch, you walk right into the fire with them. You stop being a husband or a partner. You morph into a full-time caretaker, a fierce advocate, and the only pillar holding their world up. It consumes every waking moment until you lose yourself completely. The sheer exhaustion, in his words, wasn't just physical. It was soul deep. Dealing with severe mental illness isn't just a challenge. It is a brutal, relentless grind that drains you emotionally and physically until you're running on fumes. For more than a decade, Larry pressed pause on his own life to cater to Naomi's every need. So when she left this world, he didn't just lose his wife, his entire identity, his daily purpose, and the routine that kept him grounded evaporated instantly. But in the wake of that tragedy, Larry has managed to find a flicker of light by turning his private nightmare into a public crusade. He has joined forces with the National Alliance on Mental Illness known as NAMI, which stands as a titan in mental health advocacy across the United States, aiming to generate serious cash and drive awareness for a crisis that affects millions. He started hitting the interview circuit, laying his soul bare and offering a lifeline to others who are silently drowning while caring for a sick family member. His mission focuses on a few non-negotiable truths, primarily smashing the silence and shame that still surrounds mental health in this country. He is adamant that we need to reframe the narrative. This is a legitimate disease, not some character defect or a sign that someone is weak. If you can go to the doctor for cancer or heart trouble without hiding your face, you should be able to get help for depression or anxiety without worrying about what the neighbours will whisper. Larry boiled his entire crusade down to one powerful sentiment during a recent chat. If losing Naomi can stop just one other person from ending their life, or push one solitary soul to reach out for support, or even prompt one family to finally have that uncomfortable conversation about their mental state, then perhaps all this agony wasn't entirely in vain. That is the only silver lining I am clinging to. Now we have to ask, what is your take on these heartbreaking revelations from Naomi's husband? Sound off in the comments below, and hey, if you found this story compelling, go ahead and smash that like button and hit subscribe to stay in the loop. For more gripping celebrity deep dives just like this one, make sure to click on the next video appearing on your screen right now. You never know what shocking details you might uncover next.